Good afternoon, I'm Nika.
I'm Ava.
And I'm Callista. And in this podcast, we're discussing the media bias surrounding the participation of transgender athletes in women's sports through the lenses of cultural criticism as well as historical criticism. By applying these perspectives, we are essentially aiming for a crucial understanding of how cultural and historical contexts shape media narratives on this complex issue. So the conversation quickly sparked when the media shed light on Leah Thomas, a known collegiate athlete who's a swimmer. Have you guys heard of Leah Thomas or seen her on the news? Or
I have.
Yeah, Leah Thomas has been highly recognized over all social media with opinions that vary drastically. Her story has been highlighted on social media such as TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. She is a transgender swimmer whose journey in the world of competitive swimming has been marked by both personal achievements and broader conversations about inclusion and fairness in sports.
Yeah, I definitely think that social media such as TikTok or Instagram or even Facebook is something that the average teenager relies on
and
for
gains
news.
their knowledge.
Yeah, I think that knowledge and like things that we talk about are based off the things that we see off TikTok.
Yes.
Leah Thomas was born as William Thomas, and Leah underwent a gender transition, and her story gained significant attention when she became a member of the women's swim team at the University of Pennsylvania. She was originally a member of the men's team at the University of Pennsylvania. This move ignited discussions at the intersection of gender identity and athletics, prompting a broader examination of policies surrounding transgender participation in sports, particularly in collegiate and professional settings.
Her participation drew attention due to her success in women's events. She was breaking records and achieving super high rankings. Her presence on the women's swimming team almost brought like a forefront to the questions about the treatment of transgender athletes and the evolving landscape of like just how inclusive sports are, like gender inclusivity.
Yeah, this sparked tons of debates on the inclusion of transgender athletes in women's sports, with discussions focusing on issues of fairness, competitive advantage, and the evolving policies and guidelines in place for transgender athletes.
Okay, so now that we kind of have a background on Leah Thomas, let's talk about this through like a cultural lens and how exactly it's affecting this situation.
NPR released an article around in the past 2 years, maybe I think a year ago, maybe two. The article was titled, "The World Swimming Body Effectively Bans Transgender Women from Women's Events." This article suggests that the international governing body for swimming has implemented policies or decisions that in practice prevent transgender women from participating in women's swimming events. The use of the term effectively bans indicates while that not explicitly it's stated as a ban, but the measures or guidelines may have a similar outcome. This limits the participation of transgender women in women's sports competitions.
Yeah, so when we talk about how the media covers transgender athletes, cultural analysis is looking closely at it and how it influences and reflects what people think in society. We want to understand how stories about transgender athletes are told, if there's stereotypes, and how their achievements are described. People who study this also check to see if there's fair attention given to both transgender and cisgender athletes in the media. Is there a equal amount of fairness that a cisgender athlete and a transgender athlete are getting the same amount of media time?
Yeah, cultural critics also want to know if the media stories support or challenge what people usually think about transgender individuals in sports. They examine how transgender athletes are portrayed, whether with respect or in ways that might not be fair. The goal is to figure out how the media shapes our ideas about fairness, including everyone in sports, no matter their gender identity.
So let's talk about this topic through a historical lens.
Yeah, so women in sports haven't always been able to participate. It hasn't always been equal, and this is way bigger than sports.
Yeah, it really wasn't until 1972 when women were even able to become involved in sports.
Sports are always such a they've always been perceived as kind of like a masculine thing.
Yes.
Like if you were a girl who was loved sports, you were seen as not as such a feminine thing, and
or something
something
more as a tomboy.
Yes. So over time, how the media shows women in sports has drastically changed. At first, women's sports didn't get much attention at all. They were reflected about how people thought about gender. Like we said, you were viewed as tomboy or masculine or something along that nature. But as things like women's rights and laws such as Title IX came along, women's sports grew and the media started to notice more. Can someone explain what Title IX is and how that kind of happened?
Yeah, so like back to what I was saying about women's involvement in sports, with Title IX, it was enacted again in 1972. It's a federal law that ensures gender equality in educational programs. It particularly focuses on sports for institutions receiving federal funds. It mandates that schools provide fair and equal opportunities for both male and female students in athletic participation, scholarships, and just overall treatment.
Title IX is definitely such a pivotal
Moment in time.
And for women in sports. Looking back, some experts study how the media used to talk about women in sports. They check if there are unfair or stereotypical ideas about women. Recently, there has been more of a positive change, but in women's sports, they could get more. They do get more coverage now, but it's definitely not as much as men's sports. Mm-hmm. The way they're talked about is getting better, and studying how the media treated women in sports in the past helps us see how things have improved and when there's still work to do. Yeah. I still play tennis. I grew up playing tennis, and it was definitely such a it was a mix of boys and girls. Mm-hmm. It was one of the sports where it didn't matter. Yeah. What about you, Callie?
Yeah, I grew up and I played water polo, and we would always see the boys team practicing in the pool next to us, and it was such a difference because of how different they would play versus how we would play, and it's just seeing the difference in we were separated.
I think it's super interesting to see the difference between tennis and water polo. How tennis you are able to interact with boys and play with boys, mm-hmm. But then in water polo it has to be separated. I'm wondering, I don't really know much about tennis. When you're playing professionally, does that also work, or is it only women against women and men against men?
It's a women against women and men against men, but I think in tennis I've seen such an equal fair amount of both. As a woman who played tennis, obviously I'm going to track women's tennis, but I'm just as involved in men's tennis. If we take a look at softball and baseball, softball is baseball. Just
the women's version.
Just the women's version.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, but it's
they're just vastly different.
Are there different rules, Callie?
Yeah. So well, no, the rules are basically the
rules
same.
Are the same. It's just
the
field is smaller.
The field is smaller, and there's just significant differences.
There's a ball difference.
There's just significant differences through the two sports.
Yeah. That's super interesting to take a note on.
And mm-hmm. growing up, I have an older brother that also played tennis, and him being older than me, and he has more experience, he was always better than me, and he was always something to look up to. And in that way, it's it is the difference between men and women in sports. How do you view that, and how do you take your personal experiences off that?
So thank you for tuning in on our podcast, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thank you.